Man, Visible and Invisible by C.W. Leadbeater. Chapter 19. The Developed Man. The term developed is a relative one, so it will be well to explain exactly what is here meant by it. The vehicles illustrated under this heading are such as might be possessed by any pure-minded person who had definitely and intelligently set his affection on things above and not on things of earth. They are not those of one already far advanced upon the path which leads to adeptship, for in that case we would find a considerable difference in size as well as in arrangement. But they do distinctly imply that the man of whom they are expressions is a seeker after the higher truth, one who has risen above mere earthly aims and is living for an ideal. Among such, some may be found who are especially advanced in one direction, and some in another. This is an evenly balanced man, simply a fair average of those who are at a level which I describe. We may first examine plate 21, which represents for us the causal body. By comparing this with plates 5 and 8, we shall see what the man's progress has been and how it is expressed in his appearance. We observe that by this time many beautiful qualities have been developed within him, for the glorious iridescent film is now filled with the most lovely colors, typifying for us the higher form of love, devotion, and sympathy, aided by an intellect refined and spiritualized, and by aspirations reaching ever toward the divine. Let me quote from the Devachanic plane. Devachanic plane? Let me spell that. D-E-V-A-C-H-A-N-I-C. Devachanic plane. The sixth of our Theosophical manuals. Quote, composed of matter inconceivably fine, delicate, and ethereal, intensely alive, pulsating with living fire, the causal body becomes, as its evolution proceeds, a radiant globe of flashing colors, its high vibrations sending ripples of changing hues over its surface, hues of which earth knows nothing, brilliant, soft, and luminous beyond the power of language to describe. Take the colors of an Egyptian sunset and add them to the wonderful softness of an English sky at eventide. Raise these as high above themselves in light and translucency and splendor as they are above the colors given by a child's paint box. And even then, none who have not seen this can image the beauty of these radiant orbs which flash into the field of clairvoyant vision as it is lifted to the level of the supernatural world. All these causal bodies are filled with living fire drawn from a higher plane, with which the globe appears to be connected by a quivering thread of intense light, vividly recalling to the mind the words of the stanza of Zid. Oh, I can't pronounce this word. Zion. Let me spell it. D-Z-A, no. Let me start over. Capital D-Z-Y-A-N. Zian. Okay. So, vividly recalling to the mind the words of the stanzas of Zian, open quote, the spark hangs from the flame by the finest thread of Fohat. Fohat, capital F-O-H-A-T. And as the soul grows and is able to receive more and more from the inexhaustible ocean of the divine spirit, which pours down through the thread as a channel, The latter expands and gives wider passage to the flood, till on the next subplane it might be imaged as a waterspout connecting earth and sky, and higher still as itself a great globe through which rushes the living spring, until the causal body seems to melt into the inpouring light. Once more the stanza says it to us. The thread between the watcher and his shadow becomes more strong and radiant with every change. The morning sunlight changed into noonday glory. This is thy present wheel, said the flame to the spark. Thou art myself, my image and my shadow. I have clothed myself in thee, and thou art my Vahan to this day. Vahan, let me spell that, Vahan, and the A has a little hat on it. I think maybe it's a circumflex, I can't remember. Okay, so I have clothed myself in thee, and thou art my Vahan to this day. Be with us when thou shalt re-become myself and others, thyself and me. End of quote. How hopeless it seems to try to represent all this glory on paper, yet our artist has skillfully contrived to suggest that which no brush could paint, and however far even the cleverest physical image may be from that of transcendent reality, it at least gives our imagination a starting point from which we may try to build up a conception. We must not omit to notice one of the grandest characteristics of the developed man, his capacity to serve as a channel for higher force. It will be seen from this causal body streams of this force pour out in various directions, for his attitude of unselfishness, of helpfulness, and readiness to give makes it possible for the divine strength to descend upon him in a steady stream, and through him to reach many who are not yet strong enough to receive it directly. The crown of brilliant sparks which ascends from the upper part of the body proclaims the activity of spiritual aspiration, and adds very greatly to the beauty and dignity of the man's appearance. This arises constantly from the causal body, no matter how the lower man may be occupied on the physical plane. For when the soul of man is once awakened upon his own level and is beginning to understand something of himself and his relation to the divine, he looks ever upwards towards the source from which he came, totally irrespective of any activities which he may at the same time be inspiring on the lower planes. We must never forget how small and partial an expression of the self even the noblest personality can be, so that as soon as the higher man begins to look around him, he finds almost unlimited possibilities opening before him, of which this cramped physical life can form no idea. This very upward rushing of spiritual aspiration, which makes so glorious a crown for our developed man, is itself the channel through which the divine power descends, so that the fuller and stronger the aspirations become, the larger is the measure of the grace from on high. And the next section here is called His Mental Body. It can hardly fail to strike the observer, as we come to deal with the more developed man, that these various vehicles are not only all of them greatly refined and improved, but they are also very much more like one another, allowing for the difference between what we may call the octaves of the color between the hues belonging to the lower and higher levels of the mental plane, plate 12, is almost a reproduction of plate 11. No. Plate 22 is almost a reproduction of plate 21. And the resemblance between plates 22 and 23 is perhaps even more marked, though in comparing them, we have to remember that astral colors are again of a different octave from even the lower mental. Another useful comparison to make is that between plates 22, 9, and 6, in order that we may see how the evolution from the primitive to the unselfish man shows itself in the mind-body. It will appear upon examination that pride, anger, and selfishness have altogether disappeared, and that the remaining colors have not only expanded as to fill the whole oval, but have also improved in tone as to give quite a different impression. Every one of them is more refined and delicate, for all thought of self has vanished from them, and in addition has appeared the pure violet with the golden stars, which betokens the acquisition of new and greater qualities. The power from above, which we saw radiating out through his causal body, acts also through the mental body, though with somewhat less force. This is, on the whole, a very fine mental body, already well developed, and having within it every promise of rapid progress along the path when the time for that shall come. And this next section here is called his astral body. His astral body, which is pictured on plate 23, will at once seem to resemble the mental body very closely. It is, in fact, little more than a reflection of it in the grosser matter of the astral plane. This indicates that the man has his desires thoroughly under control of the mind and is no longer liable to be swept away from the firm base of reason by wild surges of emotion. He will no doubt still be subject to occasional irritability and to undesirable cravings of various sorts, but he knows enough now to repress these manifestations, to maintain a struggle against them whenever they appear, instead of yielding to them. So though they may temporarily change his astral body, they will hardly make any permanent impression upon it, as against the much stronger vibrations of his higher qualities. In exactly the same way, at a still later stage of progress, the mental body itself becomes a reflection of the causal, since the man learns to follow solely the promptings of the higher self and to guide his reason exclusively by them. This illustration brings clearly before us an interesting fact connected with the yellow light, which signifies intellect. When this color is present in the oval, it invariably shows itself in the upper part of it, in the neighborhood of the head. Consequently, it is the origin of the idea of the nimbus, or glory around the head, of a saint. Since this yellow is much the most conspicuous of the colors in the astral bodies, and the one most easily perceived by anyone who's approaching the verge of clairvoyance. Also, even without the astral sight, it may occasionally be perceived, for when any person of some development is making a special effort of any kind, as for example in preaching or lecturing, the intellectual faculties are in unusual activity, and the yellow glow is therefore intensified. In some cases which I have seen, it has passed the bounds of physical visibility and been seen by many who had no power of higher sight than that of this plane. In such a case, it is not that the astral vibration slackens until it sinks below the line which separates it from the physical, but that it becomes so much more vigorous than usual that it is able to rouse a sympathetic vibration even in a coarse and heavy matter of the physical plane. No doubt it was either from occasional glimpses of this phenomenon or from traditions derived from those who could see that our medieval painters derived the idea of the glory around the head of the saint. It may be remembered that in the nimbus of the Christ, a cross is usually drawn, and this is strictly within the probability from the point of view of occult investigation, for it has often been observed that in the auras of the very highly developed persons, various geometrical figures present themselves, signifying certain elevated and far-reaching thoughts. Some of these will be found among the illustrations given in Thought Forms. The student will find it useful to compare these illustrations carefully, one with another, first to examine each causal body in connection with the mental and astral bodies, which are partial expressions of it. In order to understand the connection between these different vehicles, and second, to compare the three astral bodies in plates 7, 10, and 13, in order to understand how progress itself shows itself in the desire body, which is naturally much the easiest of the various vehicles to see clairvoyantly, and in fact the only one which the ordinary psychically developed person is at all likely to see. The same comparison should be instituted between plates 6, 9, and 12. No, 6, 9, and 22. And also between plates 5, 8, and 21, to study the progress of the man as manifested in his higher bodies. Among our theosophical literature, we have many books which treat the other side of this evolution and catalogue the moral qualifications required at its various stages. This is a subject of the very deepest interest, though somewhat outside the scope of this little work. Those who wish to study it should turn to Invisible Helpers, chapters 19 to 21, and then read Annie Besant's books, In the Outer Court and The Path of Discipleship. From those books, some ideas may be gained not only of the conditions of progress, but of its goal and of the glorious future that awaits us, when we shall have fulfilled these conditions, when after many incarnations upon this grand old world of ours, we shall at last have learned the lessons which its physical life is meant to teach us. Then we shall have attained that resurrection of the dead, after which St. Paul was so earnestly striving, for we shall be free alike from death and from birth, and we shall have transcended the cycle of necessity, and shall be free forevermore, free to help our fellow men along the path that we have trodden, until they also gain the light and the victory which is ours. For this attainment is for every man, and to reach it is only a question of time, however young a soul may be. There is for man no doubt about salvation, since there is nothing except his own error and ignorance from which any man needs to be saved. There is for him not even an eternal hope, but an eternal certainty. All shall attain, because that is God's will for them. That is the sole object for which He called them into existence. Even already the world is progressing, and the powers are beginning to develop, and assuredly this morning's sunrise shall increase into noonday glory. To the vistas of advancement that stretch before man, our keenest sight can see no end. We know only that they extend into splendors indescribable, illimitable, and divine.